I'll spread my legs to pay my debt, the giant widow said, but when the cowboy took her. The sun had barely risen over the wide-open plains when the widow, Clara, stood at the edge of her small, worn-down farm. The fields around her were dry, the wind blowing dust across the cracked soil. Her husband had died 2 years ago, leaving her alone to manage the farm and pay off the debts he had left behind. Every day felt like a struggle. The banks had sent letters demanding payments she couldn't make. First, neighbors whispered about her, calling her unlucky and weak. Though she knew the truth, she had tried and she had failed, not because she was weak, but because life had been cruel. Clara had once been full of hope. She had loved her husband deeply, and together they had dreamed of expanding the farm, of planting orchards, raising cattle, and one day having a house that didn't leak when it rained. But those dreams had shattered the day he passed. Since then, she had been fighting a battle she could never win. Bills piled up, creditors came knocking, and the animals grew sick because she couldn't afford proper feed. Every night she lay awake on the thin mattress, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the walls, wondering how she would survive another day. This morning, though, something felt different. Clara tightened the shawl around her shoulders and stared at the horizon. The debt collectors had given her a final deadline, and she knew she had to do something. She couldn't just sit and wait for disaster to come. But what could she do? She had nothing left to sell. Her farm was barely worth the land it stood on. Her hands were rough, her body tired, but her mind refused to give up. Just then, the sound of a horse's hooves approached. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. A tall man rode up, his hat pulled low to shield his face from the sun. He was a cowboy, she realized, from the way he sat confidently in the saddle, and the way his horse moved as if it were part of him. His presence was commanding, but there was something kind in his eyes. He stopped a few feet from her, tipping his hat slightly. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice calm, carrying a tone of respect. Rasp. "Name's Jack. I heard about your situation. Thought I'd see if I could help." Clara's lips pressed together. She had grown used to people offering help and then turning away when they saw how little she had to give. She studied him carefully, unsure if this was a trick or a genuine offer. "Help? And how do you plan to help?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, hiding the tremor in her hands. Breaths. Jack dismounted slowly, the horse snorting softly as it shook its mane. "I work around here," he said. "I've seen what the bank's been doing. You're in trouble, and I might be able to give you a chance to get back on your feet." Clara's stomach tightened. Birth. Hope felt dangerous. She had learned long ago that hope could turn into disappointment in an instant. "I don't have much to offer," she said quietly. "I'm just a widow with a farm that's barely alive."
Jack shook his head.
All it takes is the right plan and someone willing to work with you. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise an honest chance. Desk. Clara wanted to believe him, but the doubt ran deep. She looked around at the land, the cracked soil, the dying crops, and the tired animals. Could anyone really save this farm? Could anyone save her? But something in Jack's eyes gave her a sliver of courage. Maybe, just maybe, she could take a risk. "What kind of plan?" she asked finally, curiosity edging out caution. Jack smiled faintly. "Work with me. I have some ranches nearby that need hands." "It's hard work, but it pays well. You can earn what you owe, maybe even more. You'll have a roof over your head, food on your table, and the chance to get your farm back." Rex. Clara considered his words. She had always been proud, refusing help from anyone, but the desperation in her heart was stronger than pride. Breath. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said. First. Jack's smile widened. "Genuine this time. Good." "Then let's get started. I'll help you pack a few things and we'll leave before it gets too hot." As they walked toward her small cabin, Clara felt a strange mix of relief and fear. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of possibility. Maybe she could survive, maybe even thrive. But deep down, she knew the road ahead would be hard. Harder than anything she had faced before. They worked together, loading the few belongings Clara could carry onto Jack's wagon. The morning sun climbed higher, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and fresh hope. Jack was patient, offering advice and encouragement without judgment. Clara found herself talking to him in a way she hadn't talked to anyone in years, sharing stories of her husband, of the farm, and of the dreams that had once burned bright in her heart. By the time they set off toward the neighboring ranches, Clara's resolve had hardened. She would not fail. She would do whatever it took to pay off her debt and reclaim her life. Breaths. She had been through too much to give up now, and as Jack guided his horse down the dusty trail, she realized something else. Sometimes, help came in the form of strangers, and sometimes strangers could become the light in the darkest of times. The journey to the ranches was long and exhausting. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the wind kicked up dust that made Clara cough. But, with every mile, she felt herself growing stronger. Jack taught her how to handle the horses, mend fences, and carry out chores that required strength and skill. His patience never wavered, and slowly, Clara began to trust him. She even laughed at times, the sound rusty from disuse but genuine. That evening, as they stopped to rest near a small creek, Clara looked at the sun dipping below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the water. She felt tired, sore, and hungry, but also alive. Breath. She had taken the first step toward a new life, and though the path was uncertain, it was hers to walk. Jack sat beside her, quietly fishing in the shallow water. "You're doing better than you think," he said after a while. "It won't be easy, but you've got the strength." "I can see it." Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for the work, but for giving her a chance when she had almost lost all hope. As night fell, Clara lay under the stars, listening to the sounds of the wilderness. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream again, not just of surviving, but of living. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would face it head on, with courage, determination, and a heart willing to try. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet thought emerged. Maybe this cowboy, this stranger who had shown her kindness, was the beginning of something she had never dared to imagine. A new chapter, a new hope, and a life worth fighting for. The next morning, the sun rose over the plains with a golden glow, painting the fields in warm light. Clara woke early, the sound of birds singing and horses neighing filling the air. She rubbed her hands together, stiff from the long journey yesterday, but determined to start the day. Today was the first day of real work on Jack's ranch, and she knew there would be no room for hesitation. Jack had already prepared a list of chores. He walked Clara through them carefully, showing her how to repair fences, mend tools, and feed the animals. Each task was harder than it looked, but Clara's hands were strong from years of farm work, and her mind was sharp. Breaths. She learned quickly, correcting her mistakes and gaining Jack's approving nods. You're picking this up fast, Jack said as she tied a rope around a bundle of hay. Most people would be exhausted by now, but you're doing fine. Clara smiled faintly, wiping sweat from her brow. I've had practice, she replied, but her voice carried pride. But underneath it, there was still fear. Fear that this life, while full of work and hope, could still crumble. But she had lost so much before. Could she really rebuild?
Jack seemed to sense her thoughts. He didn't offer empty reassurance, only practical advice.
Every day is a step forward, he said. You keep moving and eventually you'll get somewhere. The days passed in a rhythm of labor and learning. Clara rose with the sun and worked until her hands were blistered and sore, yet each evening she felt a little stronger, a little more capable. She repaired broken fences, helped with the horses, and learned to cook meals for the ranch hands. But there was honesty in the work, and Clara felt a sense of pride she hadn't known in years. At night, they would sit around a small fire. Clara told stories of her past, of her husband, and of the farm that had once been her life. Jack listened patiently, offering words of understanding. He shared his own stories too, tales of ranching, of people he had helped, of struggles he had faced. Slowly, a bond began to form between them, built on trust and shared effort rather than words alone. One evening, as the stars sparkled overhead, Clara confessed something she had buried for a long time. I never thought I'd see another chance like this, she said quietly, staring into the flames. I thought I'd fail, that the farm, my life, it was over. Jack looked at her steadily. Life has a way of surprising us, he said. It's not about what's over. It's about what we do with what's left.
You're stronger than you know. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears.
For so long, she had carried grief and despair alone. To find someone who didn't judge her, who offered guidance instead of criticism, felt like a balm to her weary soul. Best. She nodded, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Weeks turned into months. Clara's skills grew, and the ranch prospered under her hard work. She learned to ride horses properly, to handle cattle with confidence, and to fix anything that broke. The ranch hands began to respect her, not just because of her diligence, but because of her integrity and determination. She was no longer the struggling widow from the small farm. She was someone who could face challenges and overcome them, but despite her progress, there were moments of doubt. Nights when the wind howled through the trees and Clara lay awake, thinking about the debts that still loomed over her. The fear of failure never disappeared completely, but it became easier to bear with Jack by her side. He never forced her, never rushed her. He simply offered support and guidance. One afternoon, a problem arose that tested Clara's resolve. A sudden storm swept across the plains, tearing at the fences and threatening the livestock. Clara worked tirelessly with Jack and the ranch hands to secure the animals and repair the damage. Rain soaked through their clothes, lightning flashed across the sky, and the wind threatened to blow them off their feet, yet Clara refused to give in to fear. She remembered all she had endured, the loss, the hunger, the despair, and she knew she could not let this storm defeat her. By the time the storm passed, the ranch had survived with minimal damage, thanks to Clara's determination and Jack's guidance. Exhausted but proud, she looked at the land, seeing it not just as a challenge, but as a place she could shape with her own hands. Base, you did well today, Jack said as they stood under the clearing sky. Most people would have panicked, but you stayed calm, focused, and kept moving. That's what makes a difference. Clara smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I had help, she admitted. I couldn't have done it alone. Breaths. Sometimes help is all we need to find our strength. As the weeks continued, Clara began to see results from her hard work. The ranch thrived, and she was able to set aside money to slowly pay off her debts. Each payment felt like a victory, a step toward reclaiming her life and her independence. She no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. She felt like a participant in her own story, capable of shaping her future. Yet, life was not without its challenges. A neighboring landowner, jealous of the success Clara and Jack were building, attempted to interfere with their work. Threats and intimidation followed, testing Clara's courage once more. But with Jack's guidance and her own determination, they faced these challenges head-on, standing firm against anyone who tried to take advantage of their hard work. Through it all, Clara discovered qualities within herself she had never known. She found patience in teaching others, resilience in facing adversity, and courage in moments of fear. And as she looked at Jack, she realized that trust and friendship could grow in the most unlikely of places. He was not just a mentor or a helper, he was a steady presence, someone who saw her worth even when she doubted it herself. One evening, after a long day of work, Clara sat by the creek, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Jack joined her quietly, and they shared a simple meal of bread and cheese. The air was calm, and for a moment, the troubles of the world seemed far away. "You've come a long way," Jack said softly. "From the moment I met you, I knew you had strength." "But you've surprised even me." Clara looked at him, feeling gratitude and something more she couldn't quite name. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You gave me a chance when I thought there were none left." Jack smiled, but there was no hint of pride or ego. "You did the hard work. I just showed you the path." The strength was always inside you. As night fell and the stars emerged, Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but she also knew that she was no longer alone. With determination, skill, and the support of someone who believed in her, she could face whatever came next. And somewhere deep inside, Clara allowed herself to hope. Hope not just for survival, but for a future filled with purpose, dignity, and the chance to live life on her own terms. She had begun to reclaim her story, and nothing, not debts, not storms, not jealousy, could take that away from her. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt like she was truly living, and the journey she had started with fear and desperation was slowly transforming into one of courage, resilience, and newfound strength. The weeks passed, and the seasons began to shift. The hot sun of summer gave way to cooler winds, rustling the tall grasses of the plains. Clara had grown stronger, more confident, and more skilled in every task around the ranch. Yet, with success came new challenges, tests that would measure not just her strength, but her resolve, courage, and wisdom. One morning, Clara awoke to the sound of shouting. She rushed outside to see a group of ranch hands gathered around the barn, pointing and gesturing toward a pile of broken fencing. A large section of the northern pasture fence had collapsed overnight, and some of the cattle had wandered off into the neighboring land. Clara's heart sank. This was more than a minor setback. It was a potential disaster. Jack was already there surveying the damage. "Looks like the wind from the storm last week finally caught up with us," he said grimly. "We need to round up the cattle before they wander too far. Can you help me?" Clara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a rope, mounted her horse, and rode alongside Jack toward the open field. The sun had barely risen, but already the work was grueling. The cattle were scattered, some straying dangerously close to the edge of the property, where steep cliffs and thick brush could trap them. Clara's heart pounded as she guided them back toward the fenced area, using every skill she had learned over the past months. Hours passed in exhausting labor. Clara's arms ached, her legs trembled from riding, but she refused to stop. Every animal she brought back safely felt like a small victory. Jack noticed her determination and offered encouragement. "You're doing great," he said. "Keep going, one step at a time." By mid-afternoon, the last of the cattle were accounted for, and the damaged fence had been temporarily patched. Post. Clara leaned against a post, wiping sweat from her brow and breathing heavily. She felt both relief and pride. Relief that the crisis had been managed, and pride that she had proven herself capable of handling emergencies on her own. But the challenges didn't end there. That evening, a letter arrived, carried by a rider from the town. Bay. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. It was from the bank. Despite her progress, they demanded another payment immediately, more than she had saved so far. The words seemed to leap off the page, a reminder that the past had not yet released its hold. Clara's chest tightened. She felt the familiar weight of fear pressing down on her. But this time, she didn't sink into despair, but she turned to Jack, who had been watching quietly. "I don't have enough to pay this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we find a way," he said firmly. "We always do. There's a solution. We just need to think smart and act fast." Together, they devised a plan. Jack had connections with other ranchers in the area who needed extra hands for harvesting and repairs. If Clara worked with them temporarily, she could earn the extra money needed to satisfy the bank's demand. It would be difficult. Long hours, exhausting labor, but it was possible. Clara hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She had come this far, and she refused to let fear or debt stop her now. The next morning, Clara set off for the neighboring ranch, carrying supplies and determination. The work was even harder than she anticipated. She rose before sunrise, laboring under the scorching sun, moving hay, repairing fences, and helping with livestock. Each task tested her stamina and resolve. Some days she felt like she couldn't continue, but she remembered Jack's words, "One step at a time." "Keep moving forward."
Everest. Slowly, her efforts began to pay off. She earned enough to send a payment to the bank, a tangible reminder that she was reclaiming her life piece by piece.
With each dollar saved, she felt a growing sense of independence and accomplishment. But even as she celebrated these small victories, Clara knew that true security required more than just money. It required confidence, skill, and the ability to face any challenge head-on. One afternoon, as she returned to Jack's ranch after a long day of work, she found him waiting with a worried expression. "There's news from town," he said. "A fire broke out near the old warehouse district, but some people were injured, and others lost their homes. I thought you'd want to help if we can." Clara didn't hesitate. Despite her exhaustion, she mounted her horse and rode with Jack toward the affected area. The scene was chaotic. Smoke rose into the sky, families huddled together, and animals were trapped in burning stables. Clara's heart ached for those who had lost everything, and without thinking of herself, she joined the efforts to rescue people and animals, carrying water, guiding trapped livestock, and offering comfort to those in shock. Hours passed like minutes. Clara's hands were blistered, her clothes soaked in sweat, and her body trembled from exertion, but she felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. This was more than work. This was helping others, making a difference in the world, and proving to herself that strength and courage were not just for survival, but for acts of compassion. By the time the fire was under control, Clara and Jack had helped save several families and countless animals. Exhausted but fulfilled, they stood together surveying the aftermath. The smell of smoke lingered, but so did a sense of hope. People were safe, and in some small way, life had been restored. Jack turned to Clara, a proud smile on his face. "You've grown so much," he said. "Not just in skill, but in heart. You see what needs to be done, and you do it, no matter how hard it is." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth that went beyond physical exhaustion. "I've learned from the best," she replied, thinking of Jack's patience and guidance over the months. "I never thought I could handle so much, but I guess I just needed the right opportunity and the right person to show me it's possible." As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the plains, Clara felt a sense of achievement she had never known. First, she had faced storms, debts, and exhaustion. And she had not only survived but thrived. Every challenge, every setback, every act of hard work had strengthened her, teaching lessons she would carry forever. But life, as she had learned, was never simple. Just as Clara allowed herself a moment of peace, new challenges emerged. One evening, as she and Jack were planning for the next day's work, a stranger arrived at the ranch. He was a rugged man with sharp eyes and a stern expression. He introduced himself as a land surveyor, claiming that part of the ranch's land was under dispute. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had worked so hard, and now someone threatened the very foundation of what she had built. The surveyor spoke with authority, insisting that the land must be temporarily vacated until the matter was resolved. Clara and Jack listened carefully, their minds racing for a solution. Losing even a portion of the ranch could undo months of progress. Determined not to be defeated, Clara took charge. She gathered documents, maps, and evidence of ownership, determined to fight for her land. Jack supported her fully, offering guidance and encouragement. Together, they prepared for the challenge, knowing that their combined strength and intelligence could overcome this new obstacle. He glances around in desperation. The days that followed were tense. Clara met with local officials, explained her case, and stood firm against the surveyor's demands. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her, but she refused to back down. Every skill she had learned, every lesson from months of hard work became a tool in her fight to protect the land she had come to love. Finally, after a long and stressful week, Clara received the news she had hoped for. The dispute was resolved in her favor. The land was hers, secure and intact. Relief and triumph washed over her in equal measure. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and opposition, and she had prevailed. That night, Clara sat by the fire with Jack, reflecting on all that had happened. "I've learned so much," she said quietly. "Not just about farming or work, but about myself. I never thought I could face so much and still stand tall." Jack nodded, his eyes warm with pride. "You've always had the strength, Clara. You just needed a chance to show it." "And you did, every single day."
Clara smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment deeper than she had ever known.
She had faced debts, storms, exhaustion, and threats, and she had not only survived, but grown stronger, braver, and more confident. She had reclaimed her life, her independence, and her hope. As the fire crackled and the stars shone overhead, Clara realized that the journey was far from over. Challenges would continue to come, but now she had the skills, the courage, and the resilience to face them. And she had Jack by her side, a steady presence who believed in her even when she doubted herself. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly capable. Inspiration into determination, fear into action, and hardship into strength. The path ahead would not be easy, but she was ready. And with each step she knew she was building not just a farm but a life she could be proud of, a life shaped by courage, hard work, and the unwavering belief that even in the darkest times hope could prevail. The sun rose over the plains, casting warm light across the ranch that Clara had fought so hard to protect. The fields were green and thriving, the animals healthy and content, and the fences sturdy after months of tireless work. Clara stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land she had reclaimed, not just with her hands, but with her courage and determination. Every challenge, every storm, every setback had led her here. And for the first time in years, she felt truly proud of what she had accomplished. Jack rode up beside her, tipping his hat with a small smile. "Morning, Clara. Looks like the ranch is in top shape today," he said, nodding toward the fields. Clara returned the smile, feeling a warmth in her chest. "It's been a long road," she said quietly. "I never thought I'd see it like this. It feels peaceful." Jack dismounted and walked toward her. "Peace is earned," he said. "And you've earned it more than anyone I know. You've faced storms, debts, fear, and doubt, and you never gave up. That's why this ranch stands today, and why you do too." Breaths. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of accomplishment. She had survived, she had grown stronger, and she had learned to trust herself again. The woman who had once felt powerless and defeated was gone, replaced by someone who could face challenges with courage, intelligence, and determination. The day passed in a rhythm that Clara had grown to love. She checked on the livestock, repaired a gate that had begun to sag, and supervised the planting of new crops. She moved through her tasks with confidence, each action a testament to her growth. She realized that the work itself was no longer just about survival. It was about building a life she could be proud of, one shaped by her own hands and heart. As afternoon approached, a group of neighbors arrived at the ranch, carrying baskets of food and small gifts. They had heard of Clara's accomplishments and wanted to celebrate her success. Clara welcomed them warmly, feeling a sense of community she had not known in years. People praised her diligence, her resilience, and her kindness, and Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had faced so much alone, but now she realized that strength did not always mean standing alone. It also meant allowing others to see your efforts and respect them. Among the neighbors was a woman who had once mocked Clara for her struggles. She approached cautiously, her voice hesitant. I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't understand what you were going through. You've worked so hard, and I see now that you deserve respect." Clara nodded, a smile softening her face. "Thank you," she replied. "It's never too late to start understanding. We all have our struggles, but we can also choose to support each other." Jack watched from nearby, proud of Clara's grace and maturity. She had faced adversity without bitterness, turning her struggles into lessons and her pain into strength. He knew that whatever the future held, Clara would face it with courage and wisdom. As evening fell, Clara and Jack sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting on the fields and the animals grazing peacefully. The air was calm, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and freedom. "You've come so far," Jack said softly. "I remember the first day I saw you, standing at the edge of your farm, unsure of what the future held. Look at you now. You've built something incredible." Clara smiled, a gentle, peaceful smile that spoke of inner strength. "I couldn't have done it alone," she admitted. "You guided me, but the courage came from within me. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought and that even in the darkest times, hope can survive." Jack nodded, his eyes warm. "Hope and hard work," he said.
That's the combination that wins every time.
The night grew quiet, filled with the soft sounds of nature, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal birds, and the gentle murmur of the creek that ran along the edge of the property.
Clara felt a deep sense of contentment. Round in despair, She had fought for her life, reclaimed her land, and proven to herself that determination and courage could overcome even the most difficult challenges.
In the following weeks, Clara's life continued to flourish.
She expanded the ranch, planting orchards, building new pens for the livestock, and creating a small vegetable garden that provided fresh food for herself, Jack, and the ranch hands. Each day was filled with meaningful work, laughter, and the satisfaction of progress. She no longer feared the debts or the storms. They were reminders of her resilience, not threats to her spirit. The community around her began to change too. People who had once doubted her now sought her advice, inspired by her strength and determination. Young women and men came to watch her work, learning lessons not just about farming, but about courage, perseverance, and dignity. Clara became a symbol of hope, proof that even in desperate times, one could rise and thrive. One afternoon, Clara received a letter from the bank. Break-in. Her payments were complete. Every debt had been cleared, and the farm was fully hers. Breaths. She held the letter in her hands, feeling the weight of years of struggle lift from her shoulders. She had achieved what once seemed impossible. She had not only survived, but triumphed. Clara ran her fingers over the envelope, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It's over," she whispered. "I did it." Jack placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Oh," he said softly. "It's just the beginning. You've earned more than freedom from debt. You've earned the life you've always dreamed of, and you're ready for whatever comes next." Bed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara walked through her fields, feeling the soft grass beneath her feet and the wind against her face. The land was hers, the ranch thriving, and her heart full. She thought back to the days when she had felt hopeless, when debt and despair threatened to overwhelm her. She realized how far she had come, and a sense of pride and peace filled her completely.
Dad joined her, standing quietly at her side. "You've worked so hard," he said.
You deserve every bit of this." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment deeper than she had ever known. "Thank you," she said, "for believing in me, and for helping me find my strength again. I couldn't have done it without you." Jack smiled in return. "You didn't need me," he said gently. "I just helped you see what was already inside you." The ranch, once a place of struggle and hardship, had become a home of growth, resilience, and new beginnings. Clara had turned despair into determination, fear into courage, and struggle into triumph. She had proven to herself and to the world that no obstacle was too great when met with strength, perseverance, and hope. In the months that followed, Clara continued to thrive. The ranch prospered under her care, the community grew stronger, and her reputation as a determined, compassionate, and capable woman spread throughout the area. She had not only reclaimed her life, but she had created something lasting, a legacy of courage, hard work, and hope for the future. She thought of the day Jack had arrived, offering help when she felt all hope was lost. She thought of the storms, the debts, the exhaustion, and the challenges that had tested her in every way. And she realized that every hardship, every fear, every moment of doubt had shaped her into the woman she had become, strong, wise, and unshakable. One morning, as she watched the sun rise over the plains, Clara felt a sense of peace unlike any she had ever known. But she had faced her fears, conquered her challenges, and reclaimed her life. And now the future was hers to shape. With courage, determination, and hope as her guides, she knew that no obstacle could stand in her way. The ranch was alive, the animals content, and the land fertile. Clara stood tall, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the wind in her hair. She had turned despair into triumph, struggle into strength, and loss into hope. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her to a place of true freedom and fulfillment. Jack approached, offering a quiet smile. "Ready for another day?" he asked. Clara nodded, her eyes shining with confidence and determination. "Always," she said. And together they walked across the ranch, ready to face whatever the future held, knowing that with courage, perseverance, and hope, anything was possible. For Clara, the story was no longer about debts, hardship, or loss. It was about strength, resilience, and the power of believing in oneself. Built a home and inspired others along the way. And as the plain stretched out before her, vast and full of possibility, Clara knew that the best chapters of her life were still waiting to be written.